All right, good morning, everybody. This is Tuesday morning's edition of Ask the Master Auto Technician. And I get questions all the time about loss of power. And people say, you call me up or come by or email me and say, my car doesn't have the power it used to have. And I need to know more information, so I tell them, what is the problem? What are you talking about? Lack of power when you go to pass somebody? Lack of power sitting still at idle? I mean, when you give it gas, does it fall on its face before it goes? What do you mean by lack of power is the first thing. And most of the time they say, well, it just doesn't have the get up and go like it used to. I mean, used to when I first got the car, man, I could push down on the gas and poof, it would go. And now I push down the gas and it doesn't really want to go. It goes, and there's no check engine light. It just doesn't have the get up and go it used to have. And I said, well, if there's no check engine light, what you do is first thing you do is look at the fuel trims. And that's where you would call James Auto Center and set up an appointment for a free test drive and consultation. This is what I do. I'll grab a scanner, and I won't grab a scanner that's super complicated. I'll grab a scanner you can see as well as I can. We'll look together, and you'll see what the fuel trims are reading when we're under wide open throttle, and we'll see what the fuel trims are reading when we're at idle. And we're going to also look at what the mass airflow sensor reads. Those are the 2 or 3 things I'm looking at when a customer comes in and says, I have no power. And a lot of times it's just dirt. A lot of times it's just because the mass airflow sensor is dirty. Or maybe you got dirty injectors because you have a direct injection engine and you've got a lot of carbon buildup on your intake valves. That's another common problem. And that can be treated non-invasively by doing preventive maintenance. 1, using the right oil. 2, using the right fuel. And 3, having an intake valve cleaning or a motor vac or something done to clean that carbon off, because on direct injection engines, that's the biggest culprit we're finding out there. And we see that in the secondary ignition problem, is we'll find out the spark plugs are good, everything is firing like it's supposed to. We just have a problem with the valves not seating correctly, especially when the car is cold and first cranks up. We'll get misfires. We'll get a PO300 random misfires, or we'll get certain cylinders misfiring. And the only way we've been able to successfully stop that problem is either 1, change the injectors, which no one likes to do because that's rather expensive, but the most non-invasive and the easiest thing we've been able to do is to clean the intake valves by using a non-invasive procedure by spraying an additive down the intake throttle and letting it sit all night long. Or we put a motor vac machine on it, which I find out those 2 things in combination, the IVC cleans the actual carbon deposits off the intake valve because you're letting it sit after you put it in there, it lets it soak. And it helps clean it. It really does a great job, but I like to let them sit for overnight. Some people, the instructions say, do it on a hot engine, let it sit for an hour, then go drive it like you stole it. Well, it didn't say drive it like you stole it, but then go drive it to get the carbon to break loose. I have found out I have much better results if I can let the customer leave the car with me overnight. Before we go home, spray the throttle body till the engine just about dies, where it just barely wants to run. We flooded the engine with this stuff that smells like kerosene. That's about the best way I can describe it. And then we let it sit all night long. And the next morning we fire it up normally, and it runs and smokes, and it sounds terrible, check engine lights on. And then we go drive it, and after about 10 miles of driving, of getting up to speed and slowing down, getting up to speed and slowing down, we notice the vacuum a lot of times on the engine increases by anywhere from 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches. And when it does that, that tells me we're getting power back again. That's when you really know you're getting an engine that's running right. You can look at just the vacuum. A vacuum on a good running engine is around 18 to 19 inches of vacuum at idle. That's where it's at. What we find that when cars don't run exactly right and they've got problems with intake valve deposits and things like that, we'll see the vacuum around 16.5 to 17. I mean, not enough to make the car run poorly, not enough to make the check engine light come on. Maybe it might have random misfires or something like that when it first cranks up. But I mean, when the car is idling, it seems to be idling okay. Your fuel trims seem to be okay. They're maybe just on the verge of not being okay. But the point is, a lot of times just cleaning will take care of this problem. Nothing more invasive than that. But the biggest culprit of dirt or carbon deposits is not using the right type of gasoline. I know you're sitting here going, what do you mean not using it? What I use premium, and it calls for 87, and I put 92 in it. No, I'm not talking about that. Matter of fact, if you're having to put a higher octane to make the car run better, there's something else wrong with your car, but that's another show. But the thing is, you should only put in, if it calls for 87 octane, put in 87 octane. If it calls for 90 octane, put in 90 octane. But it needs to be what we call top tier, TEIR fuel. And we're not talking about more octane. We're talking about something that has detergent additives in it that will act as scavenging agents to keep the carbon from sticking to the back of the intake valves and the top of the pistons and causing all these problems, because the normal byproduct of an internal combustion engine is carbon. That's the normal byproduct. When you have a combustion chamber, it gets very, very hot and it explodes, and you have, it pushes down the piston, and then all of a sudden it goes back, and then the exhaust stroke comes and it pushes all the stuff outside into the exhaust system. What you're getting is carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide. You're making acids that are inside there, sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, all these different acids are inside there. And these things get into your system and they cause sludge inside the engine. Yes, they do. They cause sludge in your oil. And they cause carbon deposits inside the combustion chamber. So the number one thing, if you have a direct injection engine and you seem to be having a loss of power, it doesn't seem to have the power it happened when it was new, a lot of times it's nothing more than dirt. And if the mass airflow sensor is dirty, we can see that on a test drive. And any shop that has a scanner can do this. It doesn't have to be me. So if you have access to a scanner, all needs to be done is you make sure you go to what's called engine load. I want you to go to engine load, and I want you to look at the short-term and long-term fuel trims. And you can pull that up under any OBD2 diagnostic procedure that has data. It's gonna have it. I mean, trust me, I don't care if you got a Saab or whatever you got, Saab, Toyota, Honda, Chevy, Ford, it doesn't matter. They all have that same parameters as far as load and as far as engine temperature and oxygen sensors and fuel trims. Those are what we're looking for. We're looking for the fuel trims. We want to see the fuel trims plus or minus less than 10 when you add the long-term and short-term fuel trim together when it's idle. And if we see that, we know there's nothing wrong with the system. It's operating as designed. That means there's nothing mechanically wrong. Fuel trims are right. Everything should be okay if our fuel trims are less than 10. And then we go for a drive, and we bring the car up about 35, 40 miles an hour. We're finally in the final gear, and then I'll have someone watch my scanner while I push down to put it into passing mode to make the car go into a big load. I want to see, the book says 80%. I like to see 85% load on my mass airflow sensor. If you see 80 to 85% load, the book says 80, I say 85% because I've seen some that passed at 82 just weren't right. I had problems with them. But 85%, if you can go to 85% load on there, there's nothing wrong with your mass airflow sensor. Now, I'm not going to tell you you're going to find that on Chrysler, because Chryslers don't have mass airflow sensors, but they have what's called load. And you look at that load and it calculates the map sensor and the TPFs to come up with your load. But that's another show together. But on Fords, Hondas, Chevrolets, Mitsubishis, you name it, Mercedes, BMW, all those, they have mass airflow sensors. Look at the mass airflow sensor load. That's the most important thing that I can tell you to look at if you go to a shop. If you go for a ride in a shop and your tech does not go to look at the short-term and long-term fuel trims and the load on a test drive, he needs to go back to school, because that's the only thing that we really care about when a car comes in. Is we can tell if you got a vacuum leak just by looking at the fuel trims. We can tell if you got a fuel pump bad when we accelerate just by looking at the fuel trims. We can tell if we got a mass airflow sensor bad just by looking at the fuel trims. We can tell if we got a catalytic converter that's stopped up just by looking at the fuel trims. I know that sounds too easy, but it really is. Today's cars are actually, I know, don't tell anybody, they're actually easier to work on than the cars of years past. Why? Because the computers are so much faster, they tell on each other. If one computer's not doing its job, it'll tell on the other computer on this system. It's all networked together and say, hey, this computer over here is not doing its job. He's having a problem over here. He's not pulling his load. You need to check that out. They'll set a code. It might even be a communication code where it really can't talk to it. You'll get a U code. This body control module here is just not working right. Maybe that explains why the car won't crank sometimes in the morning when you go to crank it. You don't know why. You've taken it to a shop, they've changed starters, they've changed batteries, they've changed this, they've changed that, they've done $1,000 worth of work. And what's wrong with it is no one's bothered to check to see if there's a problem in the computer. Because everything, once you put that key in, goes through computers. It has to look to see if it's anti-theft. It has to look to make sure that's the right key. It has to make sure that that car belongs to that key. If it doesn't, it's going to have weird things that are going to set. Maybe the car will crank. Maybe it won't crank. Maybe it'll start up. Maybe it'll die. You know, there's just a lot of things it can do. Maybe it'll get a theft light. Maybe it won't. You just don't know about these things. But back to the loss of power. When getting back to that right there, if you have a bad fuel pump, it'll show up on the fuel trims. You'll have, when you're under acceleration, you'll see your fuel trims climb 10, 15, 20, 30%, adding more fuel. If you got a good fuel pump, you're not going to see that. It's going to make sure it keeps it under 10, everything, 10, maybe 11 at the most, but it's going to accelerate with plenty of power. But if you get down on it, you push the pedal down and you look at the scanner and say, fuel trim, long-term, short-term, added together comes up to like 30, a plus 30. You know there's a problem there. It's asking for more fuel and the fuel pump's not delivering. And that can be found on a test drive. I know that sounds too easy, but it's the truth. You can be found on a test drive. Mass airflow sensors, they get dirty. People put K&N filters, the ones you oil, reuse them, clean them, put them back on there. Oh, these are great. They put them on there. Now they make more money off those things because they tear more stuff up. They're big bug catchers. All they do is catch bumblebees from getting through to into your engine. That's about the biggest thing. They don't. You can pull them off after you've had them on a month and take your hand and go down the tube between the air filter and the throttle body, and you'll pull a half a handful of fine dust out because the air filters do not work as designed and advertised. Now, they're great marketing. The engine sounds hot and powerful, got more air than you possibly need, but you're killing that engine. And I see people do it all the time, especially with these turbo cars. And then they wonder why I got to put a $2,000 turbo on there or more. And some cars have twin turbos. So you don't just change one, you change both. So, like I said, don't be doing things that's not supposed to be done. Keep the right air filter on there. Go to a shop if you have a drivability problem and tell them, this is what my car seems to be doing. Let's go for a ride and I want you to see what it's doing. And they should grab a scanner anytime they go and look at the fuel trims. Look at the load, look at the fuel trims. Those are the two things. Is it, at idle, is it less than 10? And when you're accelerating, is it 10 or less? If it goes to a plus 30 when you're accelerating and it's perfect at idle, then there's probably something wrong with your fuel pump. Something as simple as that can make the biggest difference, and a lot of people just can't see that because, well, they haven't been trained. They haven't gone to school to understand these numbers on the scanner mean something other than just getting codes. A lot of people can get codes and look at them and say, okay, I have a code for a random misfire. Okay, great. What cylinder's doing the random misfire? You don't know. So you've got to verify it. You've got to see these things. Codes don't always fix your problem. They just point you in the direction that it has a problem. Yeah, you got misfires. What's causing misfires? Is it because you have carbon deposits on it? This causing the valves not to seat properly? Or is it because your injectors aren't firing right, or your coil's not working right, or your spark plugs are wore out? There's just so many things it can be. Or you have a higher concentration of ethanol in there than you're supposed to have. Instead of 10%, you got 12 to 15. There's a lot of variables out there working on today's cars, and with today's computers, it makes it a lot easier. So when you're looking for drivability problems, find a shop that can do drivability studies. And if they go for a test drive with you, ask them to look what the long-term and short-term fuel trim and the load is. If they can't explain the difference between long-term, short-term fuel trim and engine load under acceleration, you haven't found a drivability shop. You found a shop that changes parts. So find a drivability shop and take care of that low power consumption. This is James Morris. We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial.
If you want the best deal in town for tires, you need to call Baytown Tires at 873-8900.
Hanson and the guys at Baytown Tires take pride in serving Panama City for over 20 years. Baytown Tires on Highway 98 in St. Andrews. All service work backed by a nationwide warranty.
Water is too powerful to fight alone. Mr. Router Plumbing. Sink, shower and toilet emergency drain services.
Part of what I'd like to let you know is what we do and how we work our system. Basically, we've got about 700 stocking dealers scattered around the 15 counties here in the Big Bend area of the state. I run a fleet of trucks, vans, and what we call hotshot vehicles to deliver to our dealers quickly so they can help service you as fast and efficiently as they can. Provide timely and efficient service and We're there to take care of our dealers, who in turn can take care of their customers.
All right, welcome back to our show. This is James Morris. I talked first about loss of power. Well, here's another loss of power out there, for diesel engines. If you want a diesel engine, it means you got a workhorse. That means you got an expensive piece of machinery that's not inexpensive to work on. And they're designed to work. They're not designed to sit there and idle. They're not designed to do a lot of, stop and go driving. They're designed to work from can to can't. And unfortunately, they get clogged up with carbon. And the reason they get clogged up with carbon is because people don't use cetane booster. So what I'm going to show you right here I'm going to demonstrate. This right here is what's called an EGR. My wife's going to focus in on this. This is an EGR tube. They're supposed to have runners inside it, holes inside it, of a tube, but there's not much of a tube inside there. They're all clogged up with carbon because the person had not been using cetane booster. Okay, let's back it out. You can see the tubes in there. Most of them are all clogged up. So there's no way, there's water that passes around the outside of this, and you got hot exhaust gases that are on the inside, and there's no way it can get rid of the heat. So you're going to end up making carbon and things getting a lot hotter than it needs to be, and drivability problems such as hesitation, loss of power. And what happens is the EGR valve is a perfect example of something that gets clogged up on these models. The EGR valve on a EGR on a diesel engine works when the car is at idle. Yeah, I know, it sounds hard to believe. EGR on a gasoline engine only works when the car is off idle cruising down the highway. They operate at two different times. An EGR valve on a diesel engine will only work when, they only seem to be working at idle. That's when they work the most, to make sure everything's doing like it's supposed to. And that's when they clog up. And they'll clog up, and those EGR valves are $600 to $700 somewhere in that area, and then you got to stick them in. But they'll carbon up with lots of carbon. Please use cetane booster. That's the only additive that I know is recommended by General Motors, Ford, Honda, Chrysler, anyone that makes a diesel engine, Allison, transmissions. I mean, anything that has a diesel engine out there, if you would run cetane booster, you would get 1, better fuel mileage, 2, less repair bills, 3, better performance. Now, what is cetane booster, you ask? Well, cetane booster is something you can buy a gallon jug at the parts store. Anna Marie, correct me if I'm wrong, for less than $15 a gallon jug. Is that about right?
Well, I know it just costs less than a couple of dollars to treat your tank, so. Yeah,
it's not a lot of money. But you put in $150, $200 worth of diesel fuel in there, and you're wanting to get 10 to 12 miles to a gallon. You put in that little bit of cetane booster in there, and you're going to pick up about a mile per gallon. The engine's going to breathe better. The engine's going to perform better, and you're going to have more acceleration, more power, and you won't be clogging things up with carbon. Honest. This is preventable. 35,000 miles ago, that was clean. I'm not making it. 35,000 miles ago, that was clean. In 35,000 miles, he's successfully managed, by not using cetane booster, to clog up the internals of this intake, and it all had to come back off again. And this is something that can be avoided. On a diesel engine, if you're not using cetane booster, shame, shame, shame on you. And if your technician has told you not suggested for you to use it, shame on him. Because if you've ever gone to any diesel class out there, and the first thing is they talk about how the engines are made. They talk about how they perform, who made them. Was it made by International? Was it made by Ford? Was it made by Cummins? But who made the engine? And what was their reasoning for making it? And how did they do to conform with today's EPA laws with low sulfur fuel? Now, low sulfur fuel, that's today's cars run low sulfur fuel. It used to be, man, we had lots of sulfur in there which act as a lubricant to lubricate things. And we didn't have a problem so much with carbon buildup. Yeah, we had a problem with it, but not like what we do right now. I'm serious. Hard, black, crusty carbon is what we deal with now. And, we didn't used to have that problem when we had certain things on cars and they worked a certain way, but we really have a problem right now with this carbon buildup because the cetane in a day's engine that you buy is between 38 and 41. You say, well, big deal. What's that mean? Well, it's kind of like octane. Your car is supposed to operate on either 87, 89, or 91. That's, low, medium, and high octane. Well, cetane is kind of like octane. Today's engines are designed to run on a 46 or higher cetane. You can only buy 38 to 41 cetane. So you're buying fuel that's not designed to run your engine correctly at its maximum performance. Why do they do that? I really don't know the reason behind why they do that, other than the fact is they don't have to, because, well, they're only required to make sure they put the minimum amount in there to make the car run. Now, how long is it going to run? Well, let's put it this way. In 30,000 miles, it's completely clogged up the EGR system because they didn't run cetane booster, 35,000 miles. So here's what I'm going to tell you. If you don't run cetane booster, every time you fill your tank up full of fuel and you don't put cetane booster, take another $100 and put back into a savings account, because that's how much damage you're doing. Every time you fill up your fuel tank and you don't add cetane booster, you're doing $100 worth of damage, whether it's the EGR valve or the intake manifold or the valves. You're building all this carbon up inside there. I don't care if it's a Volkswagen TDI or if it's a Ford Power Stroke 6.7, 6.0, 6.4, or 7.3, it doesn't matter. All these engines were designed from the manufacturer to run at 46 or higher cetane. The Duramax, the Cummins 6.7, all of those are designed to run on 46 or higher cetane. I figure if I keep saying this over and over again, it might get into your brain. You cannot buy 46 or higher cetane from the junior store or from Citco or from Amco or any place out there. They don't sell it. They don't. They don't do it because they don't have to. It adds an extra 3 to 4 cents a gallon, and they don't have to do it. They don't put it in there. It's up to you to make the choice to do it. You can talk. It's not me saying this. Contact Ford, Chevy, Honda, whoever made your diesel, and ask them about cetane booster. It's in your owner's manual. It'll tell you what your cetane rating is supposed to be. The reason diesel engines in Europe perform so much better over there than they do over here in America is the amount of cetane that's in the fuel. I've talked to engineers that know what's going on in Europe, talking about their cars that they're driving over there, the diesel engines, how come they get better fuel mileage. And a lot of it's the same exact engines. They're the same exact engines that are shipped over here. I've had people say, well, they're different engines. No, they're not. There may be a couple of them out there that are different engines, but we're looking apples to apples. That's what we're comparing. And we found out people that run cetane booster with this engine get the same exact fuel mileage as those people that run them in Europe, get the same exact mileage. If you've got a TDI diesel, turbo direct injection diesel from Volkswagen, and you're getting 42 miles to a gallon overseas, you can bring the car over here, and if you use the fuel that they sell, you'll be lucky to get 37, 38. The same car. Now, if you take that same car and put the same fuel in there but add a cetane booster, you're back up to 42, because you've raised the cetane level from 41 maximum up to 46 or higher. It's going to, by adding that additive, you boost your cetane by at least 6 points. That's how that works. So you're buying right now, like I said, 38 to 41 is the highest cetane rating you can buy if you buy it from the local service stations. I don't think there's any service station or any place that sells fuel around here, diesel fuel, that has higher cetane rating than 41. The only exceptions to that rule are people that buy their own fuel for their fleet trucks and they have cetane added to it, a higher concentration put in their tanks. It costs a little bit more, but they found out shops that are doing that, they're not replacing EGR valves every year. That's what I'm talking about. They're not having to put $850 heat exchangers just apart on cars because of the cetane booster not being installed in there. When they add that to it, they solved a lot of their problems on carbon buildup, with misfires, with EGR valves getting stuck, with poor fuel mileage. All these things were taken care of by adding a cetane booster every time they filled up with fuel. Not once every other tank, every time. And yes, it takes an extra 2 minutes to add the additive to your tank. And you usually add the additive before you add your fuel. That way it mixes like it's supposed to. That's very, very important to use Cetane Booster. I have people all the time tell me, oh, I make my car run better by putting high test in it when it usually my car calls for 87, and I put in 91 and I get better fuel mileage. And I'm kind of go, okay, you get better fuel mileage. What you're doing is you're masking the symptom of something. Normally, if you have run 87 and you run 87 and the car pings, you run 91 and it doesn't. Well, when it car pings, it's retarding the timing. Well, because that's the way it works. It's got knock sensors that pick it up. When it retards the timing, your fuel mileage drops off, but it keeps it from pinging. When you run premium, it doesn't ping, so your timing stays advanced. So what you're doing is you're masking a symptom. Well, it's the same thing if you continue to ignore putting in Cetane Booster in your fuel. It may seem fine, you may not have any problems when you first do it, but you may notice the truck or car doesn't seem to idle as smooth as it used to when it was first new, or when you use Cetane Booster. That's usually the first symptom. It doesn't seem to idle quite as smooth, or doesn't seem to start up as smooth or as quick, and runs a little rougher when it first cranks up. That's usually the first indications that you need to be running Cetane Booster in a diesel engine. Too many people ignore those early warning signs and continue to drive them, and then they bring them in here at 100,000 miles, get a timing belt put on them, a Volkswagen, or do whatever the case may be, and I kind of look at it and go, when was the last time you had your induction chamber cleaned? And they go, why is that? Your EGR system. Because it's completely stopped up. It's supposed to be this big around, and now it's about that big around, because it's completely carboned up with carbon. Now I've got another 8 hours worth of work to remove that, clean all that manually, and put it back on where the car will run like it did when it was new. The customer brings the car in at 100,000 miles thinking the timing belt's what the problem, why the car has no power. Nope, there's nothing wrong with the timing belt other than the fact it's time to be changed due to the number of miles on it in time. But they say, well, it must be the timing belt needs to be changed. It's why my power is not like it used to be. I've had that a bunch of the times. People come in here, it's 100,000 miles, my power is not like it used to be. I figure I need to change my timing belt. And I go, well, let's go for a ride. And we go to find out the car just doesn't seem to have the get up and go it's supposed to have. Then we find out why, because it's completely clogged up with carbon. Very, very common problem on any diesel out there. Whether you have a Volkswagen, whether you have a Chevrolet, a Ford, it doesn't matter. Cummins engines, if you will run Cetane Booster, you will not only be impressed at the performance, you will not only be impressed with how quiet the engine sounds, you will be impressed by how little money you have to spend in your vehicle to keep it on the road year after year after year after year. Because remember, diesel engines, I've seen them go 500,000 miles, no problem whatsoever. They can't. But they don't go that long if you don't use Cetane Booster in today's cars. You've got to use that Cetane Booster. If not, you're going to either pay me now for the Cetane Booster, or you're going to pay me a lot later to fix it. And this is what I'm trying to avoid. If you have a diesel engine and you're not using Cetane Booster, it's not too late to start using Cetane Booster. You can start reversing the effects of the carbon buildup. It may not take it all out, but it will make it better over a period of time. Start using it. You can buy it at any parts store, not that expensive, well worth the investment to keep your car or truck on the road. Cetane Booster, and it's recommended by every manufacturer out there that sells a diesel engine. Just check it out. It's worth the extra few dollars and extra few cents when you fill your tank up to avoid costly repairs down the road for EGR valves, intake manifolds, valve jobs. All these things can be avoided by using Cetane Booster. This is James Morris. Thanks for watching my show. We'll be back tomorrow morning with some tips for your car, whether it's gasoline engine or diesel. So give us a call at 850-763-0555 tomorrow morning right here on WPGX Fox 28.